welcome to ION Radio. I'm Ken.
I'm John.
And welcome to a special COVID-19 video on the Rebellion in the Rim campaign wrap-up. John, how are you doing?
Doing fine. Things have been really busy. As a lot of you know, with my haircut going back and forth throughout our videos, we record usually a month or two in advance and then release a video every now and then. As you can see, I desperately need a haircut now, and I think Ken's getting there too. But we've both been really busy. Ken works in IT, I work in the medical field, so with everything going on, him setting up everything for people to work at home and me just being busy with what I do, we've actually been more busy than we
schedules.
Yeah, I work nights, you work whatever. Yeah. We've just been really busy, so we haven't even been able to get around to doing a Skype type video in like the last month, so I'm glad that we had so much already recorded. But we decided we really needed to get this out because it keeps getting pushed. So we're gonna do our Rebellion in the Rim campaign wrap-up and talk about the things that we like, the things that we don't like, and some changes if we were to do it again.
Which we are going to be doing it again, but we'll talk about that more towards the end of the video.
Right.
So we've got a number of different things we have also been trying in the interim. We'll talk about that at the end of the video as well. So let's just jump right back into the campaign. John, you were the clear winner in this particular campaign.
Yeah, and I actually think that goes a lot with the way the forces work. So I think the Imperial are at a very big disadvantage in these campaigns, the way that they are and the way the ships upgrade, and fighters just in general. The Rebels have far better small ships that can operate with 0 to 1 upgrade, while the Empire, all their ships need lots and lots of upgrades.
A lot of mine,
Imperial tax is a real thing.
Yeah, I felt a lot of my stuff really couldn't do anything right off the bat, and I needed, and when I first started building up my fleets looking ahead, I realized it would be around round 2-3 before I could really get my fleets in the position I wanted them to be in, and without the victories, that in terms of winning each individual battle, I never really got the opportunity to do what I needed to do to make successful fleets, I think.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and especially because like my CR90 fleet, I didn't add anything to my CR90s. The only thing I added throughout the course of the game to that fleet was the reserve hangars, just because I could, and then the Z95s, which really didn't do anything. And then near the end of the campaign, I think I took 2 rounds that I didn't even add anything to them because I was at a planet that I couldn't, and I was using my fighters to add into my main fighter fleets. So I didn't upgrade for 2 rounds. I just basically played that fleet as it is. While on the Empire side, you need those upgrades. All their ships need upgrades. And
they're expensive too. And I was running into issues with not being able to get the points I needed, or just not being able to pick up the upgrades. The other thing that I found, for me anyways, that was hurting after a while, fighters. And I know that's one of the big topics we wanted to talk on. I was definitely outgunned fighter-wise, but not only that, your fighter support again on the Empire side requires upgrades, and you don't need as much with what you were running. And I think there's a couple other little planetary strategic tokens that played a direct impact into that as well.
Yeah, just sticking with the fighters, the Rebel fighters are far better. Just 1v1 versus Empire. Most of the Empire's ships are only 3 hull. And yeah, they're cheap, I guess. But when you're really looking at the fact that an Empire TIE fighter is 8 points, so
8 points,
three TIE fighters is 24 points, compared to 2 X-wings, which are
13 each.
So 26 points, so 2 points difference 2 X-Wings versus 3 TIE Fighters, the 2 X-Wings will win every single time, having 10 hull compared to the 3 hull.
Mm-hmm.
So, especially when you come into like flak fields and things like that, you're just going to get flaked to death.
Mm-hmm.
So, unless you just go ace heavy, which you can't really because you have to do the certain planets, certain battles on certain planets to even have access to fighters, to even have access to aces.
And there's a limitation to 2 aces when you start, which is a big amount of points out of 200. You're going to look at spending roughly 25% of your opening force on aces, which is fine. But again, one of the other items that we'll talk about a little bit later is there's no way to get new ships in the game either. So you really have to think ahead of time when you're building up your fleets for the entire length of the campaign.
Yeah. So let's talk about the format, the 200-point format, and playing on a 3x3 map for a second. What's
Sure.
your thoughts on this?
So I actually rather liked the 3x3. It was a little faster in terms of gameplay. I think because we were filming it, we didn't notice as much of a difference, but I know even then we were still going a little bit faster than when we were on a 6x3 table. So that's one thing I actually thought was good. I think the whole task force format opens up Armada to be a little bit more accessible, especially when you're for new players and if you're working with playing at different stores, because trying to get a 6x3 space is difficult. I think you could easily squeeze a 400-point game onto 3x3, but it will be crowded. I think the big thing that you and I really found, it doesn't necessarily lend itself to a faster game. I know you and I have played 400-point games on 6x3 in 90 minutes, and most of these games were about an hour, maybe 90 minutes, depending, especially with fighters.
Yeah, I feel that, especially the way we play, most of our games at 400 points only take place on a 3x3 total map anyway. So I don't see a big difference in that. I know that it being accessible to stores is huge because most stores won't be able to do, let's say you had 8 people show up. That's 4 6x3 tables. That's a lot of floor space compared to games like X-Wing and other similar type of games that are able to be played on the 3x3s. So I think this is a good transition to that.
I'd agree. And I think the campaign definitely lends itself, well, Rebellion in the Rim anyways, to more store play than necessarily the open play format.
Yeah. Which I'll just jump right into it. After playing through it, I feel that this is not as much as a campaign as a way to organize open play. I feel that, yes, holding certain planets is important, but in the end of the day, you're just trying to gain points with a fleet that can't really lose anything. So you're just bringing the same fleet over and over again, week after week, or match after match in our case, to the game store to play your campaign. I just don't feel like it's a campaign. I'm more of a world type empire builder. That's how I think of a campaign. And for this was just the same fleet over and over, and a little bit of an upgrade. Just a little. Maybe. Depending on where you're fighting. But you could be stuck into a whole thing of fighting on planets because the other person's attacking, and that fleet will never get upgrades.
And if you're not doing as well, like in my case, I wasn't getting the points that I wanted, and I wasn't necessarily getting the upgrades that I wanted either. I would choose something not as good so that if I have an opportunity to get rid of it and buy something better later, I could. And again, we just never quite got to that particular point in the campaign.
Yeah. So to compare this to the Corellian conflict, I like to think about feedback loops. So you got negative and you have positive feedback loops. So a positive feedback loop would be something like, oh, I've gained something, so now I'm more powerful, compared to a negative, which is I'm losing something, so now I'm not as powerful. I feel that the Corellian campaign had very strong negative loops. The fact that you get scarred, then you die, and that ship is gone. made it very difficult for players when they started to lose. Like, if you started the campaign and you got tabled, might as well end the campaign right there, because there was no way you would ever get enough points to recover to catch up to the other player, especially because the positive feedback loop for the winning players was also very strong. So if you started here and you both ended up here, that difference is now giant. In the few Carillion campaigns that I played, my fleet was almost at 550 points after like round 1 or 2, while the other player, I ganged up on them and they didn't repair one of their large ships, and that I just went into that game and killed it right off. So that was, I believe it was an MC-80 Liberty gone. How do you replace that?
Well, when I had played the Carillion Conflict campaign, and I noticed that after the second round, the biggest difference was my Imperial fleet wound up being at around 470 points, and the largest Rebel fleet was about 310 after starting at 400. They weren't winning. They weren't getting the points they needed to replenish their ships. They couldn't pay to unscar half their stuff, and you were losing things. So in that particular instance, a slower progression in terms of making fleet sizes larger, I think, would be a good thing. But that kind of goes right into one of the things that I thought was lacking in Rebellion in the Rim. There really wasn't as much of a negative issue. You weren't losing ships, ever. You couldn't. You could scar them,
No.
but that was it.
I mean, I think the kind of the joke between us is at the beginning of the round, whenever you had like your fighter heavy fleet scarred, you would just put the station near yourself and you would just heal up. So before our fighters even get engaged, it didn't even matter.
Right.
You just unscar your ships and hope that the station's near you. Done.
Right. And it didn't create... It put yourself in a position for me and the Empire player. If you have an interdictor cruiser, why are you hyperspacing out? There's no need to. Maybe to save a veteran ship, but that's it. I mean, there's no benefit to not just going in and trying to see what you can pull out victory-wise if you're just going to lose all your ships anyways, and then get them back at the end of the round.
Yeah. So I think that it's at a hard spot. I thought that they fixed a lot of the negative feedback loops, but they overfixed it, because now there is no real negative feedback loops. The negative feedback loop is when you lose, you don't gain as much as the other player. So it's really just not as much of a positive loop then. But I
think they were also looking for the conditions to have more of an impact on the gameplay as well.
Yeah,
they really didn't.
The conditions never really came up.
No.
So, and when you have a condition, you can't get another condition. I really gamed that system. And my fleet that wanted to go slow anyway, I'm like, oh, start at 0 or back edge or whatever. I'm going to start at 1 in the back edge anyway, so take your pick.
Yeah.
So that didn't matter, and that protected that fleet for the entire campaign of ever getting another condition card. Even though I think there was a couple that I should have. But I already had it, so it didn't matter.
You weren't getting anything out.
Yeah. But, like, maybe doing condition cards for scarred ships might have been an answer. So if your ship's scarred and destroyed, here's another condition card.
So now that'd be an interesting thought, because then that way you have some incentive to unscar your ships, rather than a fleet-wide condition. Actually, that'd be an interesting thought that just came to my head now, would be a deck of scarred conditions, where when you have your ship scarred, you pull something out, and then depending on what the top card of the deck is, it's going to be some kind of odd detriment. Can't fire until round 4 or something like that. Or something maximum speed -1. Whatever the case may be, things that actually negatively impact your ships for being scarred. Because again, it's easy to unscar your ships in Rebellion in the Rim.
Yes, it is. I think that also comes into effect with talking about conditions and things like that. We played a 3 versus 3 campaign.
Mm-hmm.
And we did that because we wanted to get as many fleets and as many new things as we could to the table. But thinking about it now, I think the next campaign for sure we're just going to do a 2 versus 2.
Right.
And it might be better balanced toward that. Because starting with only 2 bases, because each player gets to place their own base at the
mm-hmm.
beginning of the game. So we both started with 3 bases, which we split up between, I believe there's 5 zones on the map? 5 or 6.
5 zones on the map. 5 zones.
So we only had 2 zones of the map that we didn't have bases or presence in at the start of the game. Mm-hmm. And then with that, we could each heal 3 things per game round, if you would, campaign turn round. And then both of us in the first round, because we chose resource planets, were able to build a base, so then we were up to 4 things that we could heal. So mm-hmm. maybe it's designed to not allow you to build bases and heal as fast. But still, the Scarred Fighters, it doesn't really matter. Like, you just land on the outpost and you're fine. Right. But I think that will change the flow of the game. But then you get into this idea of if you build a fleet for defense and a fleet for attack, then the same fleets are facing each other every single round
mm-hmm.
of every single campaign turn. And that kind of takes the fun out of it, or at least in my head it does.
Well, when all you're really seeing is, we played I think 4 total rounds of the game,
yes.
And then the 2 pivotals. At the end of the day, if we played the exact same 2 matches with a slight difference in upgrades, 3 or 4 times in a row, and then twice with the big ships in there, I think we would have gotten bored of those fleets and those matchups. We didn't have that too much in 3-on-3.
Mm-hmm. We changed it up a little bit after you kept sending your interdictor fleet to die against my my same fleet over and over again. You're like, scrap it.
Yeah, let's scrap it and swap it out. Now, that's another thing you might see more of in 2x2 play, is changes to fleets on a turn-to-turn basis, depending on where points kind of sit. As opposed to one of the things you would never really do in Corellian conflict, because to get a new fleet, you were losing a victory point. So I think that's one good thing that came out of changes in Rebellion in the Rim.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Let's talk about some things that we chose to do during our campaign that were a little bit mid. So let's talk about tabling.
Sure.
So technically, tabling is in, I believe, the competitive rule set compared to just normal play.
Yes.
And it's technically not in the FAQ. So technically, tabling flotillas should only be used during competitive play.
Yes.
We chose in our games to be using it just so then we use a similar rule set to what we normally play. But I know you had some thoughts and concerns about if we would want to do that in the future. So what are those?
So one of the things that I was thinking about specifically to tabling, and John, I think you're going to find this kind of funny, is that when we are tabling ships, you're depriving the attacking player the ability to destroy more and scar more of the opponent's ships. Now, in your case, or my case, I should say, it was actually a benefit that we were tabling, because the number of fighters and flotillas that managed to survive an extra campaign round, I think was a good thing for me.
Gotcha. That is kind of funny to think.
Having said that, if we turned the tables around and I was, knocking you out and not killing your ships, I'd be like, come on, I want to destroy one more thing. So I think that's one thing. I don't know, though, from the campaign perspective that we played, if that really would have made much of a difference at all. I think instead of some of the larger victories, it would have been a little bit smaller. That's about it. And in some cases where I know you would have taken out the transport anyways, it wouldn't have mattered.
Gotcha. Yeah. So my perspective on it is, in a 200-point game, most of the time you're going to see 2, at most 3 activations, unless a fleet went specifically just to play small ships, kind of like my CR90 fleet. So the flotillas themselves, what they add to the game is activation advantage at a very significantly cheap price. So if your flotillas are the only thing left, then you didn't use that advantage in the game to keep your big ships alive. That's kind of my thought. So yes, you should still be tabled. At that point, chasing down scatter ships is not fun, regardless of the size of the map.
Right.
And if you just had... I saw somewhere someone put something... we could also talk about composition in a second. But if you took, like, an Architon or a Raider, right? You could just put it on the back edge and fly sideways, and then just the rest of your fleet can be rogue squadrons. That doesn't sound like fun. Like...
That's a really neat idea.
Yeah, how many fire sprays can you fit into 250 when you have...
Quite a few, actually.
A naked...
Raider, yeah. Doing nothing,
Raider. Yeah. Or you just spend a little bit extra points and you go with Architon with the Blast Door so you can heal 3 health. And then you just have fire sprays or decimators. And that's your game. You just play fighters from afar. Coming next season to a campaign near you. No, so like
watch that become a thing in the campaign meta. Nothing but fighters. Although that would actually, if you're going to do that, you might as well just go play X-Wing.
Right, exactly. So like you have to take that into consideration is that the flotilla itself gives you an activation. And you need to leverage that in the way you play. So that's
your
my
CR90 fleet did that remarkably well with the 3 CR90s and the 2 transports. By the time I was done activating, you had control of the board.
Yes. But if you destroyed my CR90s, I should be out, not, now you have to chase down my my transports. That would just not be fun.
Well, if I had an onager.
Which brings me into that, I don't think this is really designed for onagers or Starhawks.
No.
That would just make this a very unfun experience.
I'm going to agree with you there. I think one of the things we should agree on for the next campaign, no Wave 8 stuff.
Yeah.
At least not the ships.
Which might disappoint some of you, but going against an onager fleet when you're rebel small and a small map, you can't outmaneuver it, and you just have to run right into it while they bomb you across the field. Probably is not going to be very fun.
You'll pass, huh?
Yeah, I'll pass. Even though I think the next time I'm going to be Empire, so I'd be the one hammering you from afar.
I'll just bring a Starhawk into it then. So.
Yeah.
I'll be on the delivering end instead of the receiving end of the Starhawk.
Yeah. Okay, so next let's talk about something that I actually think we should institute for our next game. This would be a total house rule for us, which is crippling.
Well, we've talked about this. Yeah, I'm complete agreement with you on that. I think it would have changed the way some of the scoring would have worked for our campaigns. John, I'll let you talk about it because it was originally your concept.
Okay, so the concept for crippling comes from the Super Star Destroyer, which is if you can reduce it to half hull or less, that you score half the points rounded up for that whole fleet, or for that ship. So with the Super Star Destroyer costing what it is, most of the time you're only going to have enough space for one ship and then possibly some small fighter support or 1 or 2 Gazantes, which is actually like the way that it's normally flown, which is like a super killing ship with 2 Gazantes defeated tokens and to repair it. If you're able to... But they're hiding behind it, so you have to go through the Super Star Destroyer to damage the Gazantes. So for the most part, you have to wipe them out to score any points. So to counterbalance that, the crippling rule is if you can lower the health of the Super Star Destroyer by half, you score half points for it. Which in some very close games, if they don't completely table you and you just do enough damage to them, it could be a very close game. So taking that concept from the Super Star Destroyer rules and applying it to every single ship in the game that you score half points from, I think would work very well in this campaign. And if you were going to be doing, like we just talked about this, we talked about it and came up with this idea while we were recording this, but doing like additional like condition cards for scarred ships or crippled ships, that would change the way the campaign itself played. So, for example, my CR90s, if I had taken, because they're only 4 hull, if I'd taken 2 hull points and I had 2 hull left, then that ship would be crippled and Ken would have earned half score from it. I don't remember.
22 points. I think your CR90s are 44 points a pop.
Well, upgrades account for that as well. So I think it comes to 51 points because I put the TRCs on it.
You had the TRCs on there, yeah. So
it'd
they
be
were each 51 points. 25.
6 points rounded
26,
up.
Right, round up. Mm-hmm.
So there's multiple games that you actually almost destroyed all my CR90s, and I'd be like, okay, this one's going to be dead next turn, jump away.
And you moved away.
And then, like I would just kill you, and all my ships would be on 1 health. But if we were to add up half of that, that's really how close the game was, especially with so few ships. I feel that 200 points is either tabled or not tabled. With how many ships are out there, the crippling effect would be better. Or when your Star Destroyer goes up against my MC-80 fleet, and we bash into each other, and I kill you.
And then we fly away, or we,
we crisscross. I think crippling would change the score, because the way that the score currently is tied in with XP and earning upgrade cards and things like that, the larger the victories, the more XP you earn.
Right.
So it was like, we also came into this, I didn't realize that you could probably buy more commander upgrades than 1 a turn. I don't know where I got that idea, but like I had so much XP that I didn't know what to do with it. Like, I just didn't know what to do with it. So that would shrink the margin of victories so that less experience points would be handed out throughout the campaign, especially during the pivotal, because because I won by like a 10-1 margin against you, because I managed to keep my ships that were at this much health alive. I scored a huge amount of points, because it's like a 150 or 75 for an XP point difference.
So it wound up being 644 to 71 in the first one, and 723 to 123 in the second one. And if you figure I would have scored maybe another 200 or 300 points in each one, that's a significantly different game.
Yes, it is, especially when I'm looking at like a margin of victory of 600, which is just an absurd amount of points and experience than all my commanders got. So I think moving forward, we'll at least trial it in our campaign to see how it goes. But I really think that crippling in a campaign, especially if we tie it into at crippled you get scar 1, and then if we're doing like multiple scars to actually damage ships, would be a good thing.
It definitely put you in a position where you want to protect certain ships more, and you may not be as risky with ones if you're looking at losing half points. So it would change the dynamics of play, I think.
Yeah. And then let's move forward. Let's talk about Squadron Cap. I know that you're a fan of using the 25% limit for squadrons. I'm not necessarily at the 25%. I feel like that limits your fighters too much, but limiting it for sure to like 50% of your total build, I think would be a benefit, because fighters in 200 points are so powerful. So powerful.
So. You've got essentially an extra activation of sorts, and it just impacts negatively, I think. I've got a puppy that just jumped into my lap here.
Okay, so let's talk about Squadron Capping.
Yes.
So I know, Ken, you are in favor of doing a 25% of your fleet, kind of matching the rest of Armada rules. I'm actually not a fan of that, just because of how few fighters then you can get on the table.
Well, you'll start out with probably 3, although if you do Y-wings, that's 5 Y-wings at the start. I think my reasoning for that was my initial thought in terms of trying to prevent fighter-heavy fleets, kind of like what you threw at me. But what would you think of in terms of a better way to handle that?
So that's a hard thing. So you need still ships, but fighters. So basically, it would be one of those conversations that we had, like how we talked about earlier, how you could technically bring like the smallest ship possible to put your commander on, and then just fill the rest with rogue.
Right.
We'll agree not to do that.
Sure.
So a lot of this, because it is more of a conversation that you have with the people that you're playing with, talk about what type of fleets you want to see from the beginning. So like my fighter heavy fleet, I still had 2 Peltas, which comes to just over 100 and something points. I did fill it in with almost 100 points of squadrons thereafter, but maybe a 50% cap. So
I think there has to be something, because my biggest concern is, again, like what we brought up earlier, a Raider or an Architans with nothing but, fire sprays, or YT-2400s and a CR-90. It just, I think it would create a negative balance. Although I also agree with you in the instance of the situation where if you're talking it through what's fun, what's not, I think that would have an impact to gameplay as well.
Yeah. Okay. Then let's jump right from fighters being overpowered to the super overpowered
the allied tokens. Yes.
Man, they are overpowered.
45 points worth of your regular squadrons was devastating. When you figure that's roughly 20% of the fleet size, that's a lot. And there was never any incentive to try and take a ship.
No, there's not. Also, the difference between the Empire and the Rebellion is huge. I believe you did all the math on what ships are possible for both sides.
Yes.
If you were to take the ship option.
And at the end of the day,
what is the limiting forces for all that?
You for the Empire, you get the Gazantes, both types, and a Raider 1. That's it. With the Rebel side, you've got both CR-90s, both transports, and both hammerheads. So at the end of the day, you have a field of options for Rebels that just the Empire can't match. So the Allied token is definitely geared towards helping out the Rebellion. And actually, I think the campaign in general is really slanted in that direction, kind of like the exact opposite when it came to Corellian conflict.
Yes, I would agree with that. The campaigns who they favored switched in this. So if you didn't go with the ship, you could take 45 points of squadrons, which I think, honestly, most of the time that would have been more squadrons than most of your fleets had.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I had most of mine had 2 or 3.
So in our campaign, I controlled both places that we could get allied tokens. And then if you chose to ever attack my bases there, I would just spend the allied token on that base. And most of the time I had either ion cannon or I had fighters. So if you attacked a base with fighters and I got 40 points of normal fighters plus 45 points of allied fighters plus my fighter wing, because I would send my heavy fighter there, you would be looking at nearly 200 points of fighters,
which is a fleet in and of itself. So yeah, it was definitely, it's a fighter heavy campaign.
Yes. And then take into account that I also controlled all the fighter planets.
Yep. Trying to get any new fighters was very difficult to do.
Your Star Destroyer fleet idea was to eventually fill it out with fighters. But you couldn't do that when I controlled all the fighter planets.
Correct.
So then you went into it with ships that didn't have upgrades because you were Empire. fleets that didn't have fighters against fleets that could field almost your entire point value with fighters and sit back and just bomb you out of existence.
Right.
So that's cool. So we had a couple different ideas on how to fix the ally tokens. One of our major ideas was ally tokens would grade how you would be doing it based on how many points you had for the round. So if you were way behind, then the token would help you more. And if you were way ahead, then why would your allies come to help you? You're winning.
Right.
That became complicated, so I believe you and I came up with a different version. So I'll let you talk about the math and...
So one of the things we looked at was try to keep as close to that 45 points as possible. And I think we just both decided 45 points may have been a little too much. Maybe drop it a little. And what we ultimately came down to make it as close to fair as possible would be to give essentially two options. So option one, if you spend an ally token, would be to take 2 irregular squadrons. And point-wise, doesn't matter what it is, because in the case of the rebels, that's going to be somewhere between 12 and 32 points. And in case of the Empire, it's going to be between 12 and 44. But the second option would be to take 1 flotilla with an upgrade. And your upgrades on that are going to range between 1 and 8 points, depending on what you put on your flotilla, and 1 irregular squadron. So I ran the math, and your average numbers are going to be about 25 points for the Rebellion, 30 points for the Empire if you take the transport and an irregular squadron with the upgrade. And it's a little bit higher in both cases, 29 for the Rebellion or 33 for the Empire if you take 2 irregular squadrons. That's the average numbers. The actual numbers range a little bit more than that. But the Empire's got a slight point advantage, but it's going to be somewhere between 1 and 5 points.
Gotcha. So in that case, you get a ship and a squadron, or just 2 squadrons.
That's the idea.
I think we both feel that having the additional ship is actually worth less than just having the 3 squadrons.
Yes, I would agree.
So,
and the activation is nice, but if you can't benefit from it, you might as well take the 3 squadrons. And since most are regular squadrons, you have the opportunity to pick up something with Rogue. That's essentially another activation in a manner of speaking.
Yeah. So, for our future campaign, we're probably going to experiment with using an alternative form of that. So, let's talk about the rest of the tokens.
Sure.
What's your thoughts on the rest of the tokens?
Well, the Diplomat token really never came into play. It didn't come into play much in Carillion Conflict either. So when you start looking at what your options are, I think it's just more a matter of why are we having a token that's not really ever coming into play. Let's see what else you have. The resources tokens were interesting. I liked how you could spend those to get bases and whatnot. I think that worked better than having points that you spent akin to Carillion Conflict. And
yes, I would agree with that.
I thought that was a great way to make points simple, cheap, easy to figure out and understand, and it didn't require a lot of overhead and paperwork to keep the campaign running. So I liked that. The Destiny tokens, I don't know that we really had much of an opportunity to use it in our campaign. I think we had one opportunity where that came into play. I think that's nice, and I think it's limited enough to where it's not really going to be too overpowering.
Yes, but so if you look at comparing the tokens, you have to look at comparing them to the ally token or to resources, which gives you a base, which both those actually have good value. The Destiny token, being able to reroll 1 attack, I believe it is, for the entire game, and then it's spent and gone. I don't feel like it's
that's true.
Very, like, to go after it, and I would have to double check what else is on those planets. But, like, that or maybe a resource? Like, it's not worth it. The other tokens, Skilled Spacer, which allows you to redeploy your ship.
If you know what you're doing, that's never going to really come into play.
Exactly. So, like, my fleets, there's not a single time that I would use it. my ships were designed to synergize together to either drop squadrons and I want to be close to my squadrons to command them, or dropping a big ship and a small ship that is passing in tokens. Or my CR90s, which they kind of want to be swarm mechanics, so they want to be all together. So I would need like 3 tokens all at once to redeploy all my CR90s, and that's not worth it.
No.
I just don't see the worth of that token. And in the bigger pivotal battle games, I still don't see it being worthwhile to be able to move one ship. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe other people know how to play it differently. I just don't see it being very...
I think if you have a significant activation advantage, it could come into play just because you have the opportunity to maybe get the opponent to deploy on one side of the board versus the other. I can see that maybe having a little bit more of an effect in a standard 6x3 sized board. I think in the 3x3 sized battle areas, I don't think it had as much of an impact.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So
and
that's
for
actually the
what it's
spy
worth,
token.
the Destiny token is only available on Dagobah and Tatooine, and there's nothing else on those planets. But you have to go get them. Right.
Exactly. That means that you're not going after ally tokens, you're not going after enemy bases, you're not going after resources, you're not going after fighter planets.
Right.
Which are what you want to go after. So I call that what we just talked about, skilled spacer. It's actually the spy net. The skilled spacer, I feel, is even more useless. Being able to increase by 1 the amount of veterans that you can do. I think all of my ships were veteran by round 2, and then I had a stack of spacer tokens I could do nothing with.
Right.
And when you look at it, that you're not limited per side for how many people that you can make veteran. It's just 1 per fleet. You only really need maybe 1 skilled spacer for the entire game, and then you're veteran. And because veterans don't die and you can't lose them out, there's no reason to try to increase how many veterans that you have. So if you think about it, if you have two aces and 2 ships, that means in 4 games you could have all of them be veterans.
Yeah, you could. I think if ships could disappear or be destroyed permanently campaign-wise, and you had a mechanism in play, spending resource tokens as an example, I think the token would have more value. But as it stands, again, because nothing's dying, and once you have your veteran tokens, there's no real need for it. I think it's a wasted token.
Yeah. So I feel like those were a lot of ideas that came from the Corellian conflict that came over that they didn't change, which they had an opportunity to change to make better.
I agree.
So
the repair yards token was one that I thought was interesting, in the ability to remove additional scars. And I think that was about it, right? Oh no, during upgrades you can get a different squadron type or upgrade, choose an additional upgrade card. So there was a little minor utility to it, but I don't know that it was as important at the end of the game to swap out to a larger ship. That would be useful.
Okay, so next on the list of things is commander abilities. I really, really enjoyed being able to design my own commander.
That was pretty cool. I think that was the highlight of the campaign for me.
Yeah. It actually made it very difficult because we played so much campaign, like all in a row, because we were playing each round 3 games.
Right.
And then sometimes it took us 3 days just to keep us from going insane and not playing 9 hours straight for the pivotal. We played a lot of the campaign. And in normal Armada, I really wish there was more commanders and card abilities. And I'm like, okay, I'll get this token, and I'll start with that, and it will do extra. Like, I really enjoyed a lot of those different abilities. It was very nice.
It was sometimes almost hard to pick something over another, depending on what you ultimately wanted to do with your fleet. And that was, I think, probably the interesting thing to me. And you really you were rooting for your commanders to do well and to get the points that you wanted.
Yeah. I feel that while I enjoyed it, being limited to 4 tiers of things, and some of them going up to tier 3, those tier 3, like the power scale wasn't enough. Like, don't get me wrong, they're powerful skills, but I don't see a reason to ever take a tier 3 like token manipulation piece. So the first one usually is it just works for your flagship.
Right.
Okay. Then the second tier kind of works for your whole fleet, and then the third tier is like, oh, and now it works for your whole fleet plus this.
Little extra.
Little bit extra for like significantly more points invested into it. And because you're limited to only 4 levels of things, that means you only can have tier 1 as your last spot to fill in for your commander, and most of the tier 1s are just garbage.
I felt in a lot of cases it was worth having 2 tier 2 skill sets.
Or for my example with the MC 80 that I had, it's the only ship that mattered, so I just filled it with tier 1s, and I think I could have like every token, and then I ignored the fact that I could be obstructed. Which was really good because I didn't really command fighters with it, so I just grabbed a nav, a concentrate fire, and a engineering with it to basically have any token I wanted, and then all my tokens could act pretty much as command dials at any time. And then basically at the start of the game I just engineered throughout the entire game just to heal.
Right.
Come kill me.
The one set of commander abilities that I thought were a little underpowered were the logistics ones. The ones like Ready Defender, which prevented you from gaining the low fuel, and Independent Raider. I think I had one of them. I think you had one as well. I didn't see those come into play nearly as much. And if memory serves, the Tier 2 stuff in there was getting extra icons and officers and whatnot in your fleet, like bridges and command staff and stuff like that.
Yeah. Which would be really good as a Tier 1 ability.
Yes, no, I agree.
And then, so like, to switch it up, I think a little bit more refinement should go into it, and maybe knocking off Tier 3 completely. Or, like, and then rearranging how the powers work overall for the tokens. Or expanding it that you can have 5 tiers worth of things. So then you can have a Tier 3 and a Tier 2 power. Because I think that would be very interesting. I think I would have to go back and look at it. But being able to do that, having the Tier 3 fighter token one may have been beneficial to my Pelta fleet, in addition to the fighter group leader, which I think is the absolute best commander ability in the entire campaign.
It worked well for you, that much is for certain.
So, fighter group leader and the ambush gunner one. Those are the best abilities in the game.
Definitely the ambush gunner. That one I can see. I know in our store campaign that we were playing before all this kind of hit, I think that was selected by 2, maybe even 3 of the 6 players. It's a popular one.
Yes, but that's just because we had a player that joined like kind of midway, and he hasn't picked it yet.
No.
Which he's going to pick if we continue that campaign.
Well, we'll have to see
which
what
actually
happens
leads
after COVID, but
yeah, after 6 months of not playing.
Yeah.
So then that also brings up, I know you wanted to talk about after Pivotal, you felt like there was a step that was missing.
So I think either there's a misprint where there was no way to spend your experience points you gained, or you gained way too many. In most battles you would gain, I would say on average you're going to gain 2 or 3 points. You were gaining more than that just because of the margins of victory. But in the Pivotal battle, I think there was one case where you got 8 points per commander. And I almost think that maybe it should be, we take that sum total and divide it up by the commanders, or there's got to be a different margin there. So that's one thing that I think has to change, because it's too much of a jump into round 2, and if you go into Act 3, that would be a huge jump as well. Either that, or, again, at the end of the Pivotal battle, you've got all these experience points. You can't spend it until the end of the first game round after the Pivotal. And that it just compounds the problem, because now instead of having 8 points per commander, you have 10 or 11 points per commander to spend.
Yeah, I think that when we got done with the first pivotal battle, then we only had really one round of round 2,
right,
or act 2, before we went into the next pivotal battle, and we each had like 11 to 14 points
right,
to spend, and my one fleet was already completely upgraded because I only needed the 2 upgrades.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of points.
I'm actually looking at our commanders right now, and at the end of the game, you had one guy at 11 experience points left, and one at 8. So, I mean, at the end of the day, yeah, we've got all these points that couldn't get used.
Yeah. I feel that at the end... But this just goes into how I feel like the game was intentionally slowed down with upgrades compared to the Carillion, which you could just go crazy.
Right.
And like double your fleet size in essence after if you didn't get scarred. Yeah, exactly. I feel that they've intentionally slowed it, which hurts the Empire.
It hurts the Empire. I think the one benefit, we touched on this a little bit with this being great for store play, this is a good campaign for newer players, because you're not, you're limiting your selection of what you can do with your ship, and you're limiting where you go to a particular type of upgrade. So for new players, it's a lot more forgiving in that respect. I think where you're going to really run into a problem, and this was clearly highlighted over the course of the campaign, you had been playing Armada for a year plus, where I kind of just put it down, and there was definitely a skill gap between me and you for this campaign. It showed, and it really hurt.
Yeah, that is very true. I know that the people that we play with in the store for the campaign, a lot of them are just transitioning from I want to play with basically the core set and no upgrades to, oh cool, now I have an upgrade for my ship.
Right.
And they're learning about the upgrades and different tactics and skills, or even how to use which commands to be used when.
Right.
And I know that's something that I am a huge proponent of, is you should have all your commands already figured out before the game and stick with it. If you're in a fighter carrier, maybe nav turn 1 depending on what it looks like, and then just straight squadrons, because it's a carrier. If it's not commanding squadrons, why did you bother to bring it?
Right.
And then if it's a bigger ship, it's most of the time always better to navigate to try to get the ship into whatever your most powerful arc is, compared to concentrate fire. So if you... Yes. Sorry. So if you think about it, like a front of an ISD2 is 4 blues and 4 reds, compared to the sides, which I think are 2 blues, 2 reds.
Something like that, yeah.
So you could add 1 dice, which can possibly do 1, if you add a blue, 1 damage, 1 critical, or an accuracy. Or you add a red and it could do nothing, possibly 2 damage, a critical, 1 damage, or an accuracy. You're really looking at only really 1 damage increase if you do a concentrate fire for an ISD, versus doing a navigate, which could force your arc into the primary arc. So that's 8 dice versus 4 dice.
Right.
That's a huge jump of firepower. It's more important for a Star Destroyer to be doing navigation.
Whereas if you get something like a CR90, 1 die versus 3 is a huge increase, because now you're increasing your firepower by 20-25%, as opposed to maybe 10.
Yeah. And then you're just looking at odds. If you're rolling 3 reds, more than likely one of them may come up as a double hit. And then one of them's going to be coming up as a blank.
Right.
And then you can just take that blank and you can just change it right to a double hit, and now you're doing like 5 points of damage with a little tiny ship. Then it's important.
Correct.
But it's a balance point between navigation and concentrate fire. But you should be able to tell, because it's only 1 command dial, what you need to be doing compared to like a Star Destroyer. You don't know what you need to do 3 rounds in advance with a Star Destroyer. So just assuming you're going to need to navigate is probably the best bet.
At a minimum, it gives you some options, whether you want to run away or you want to really go for a strike and attack. And that's probably the key with navigation on your larger ships, especially the ones that require 3 or 4 command dials.
Yeah.
So, all in all, thoughts total on the campaign. I know we've talked a little offline that in some senses we don't really feel it was, quote, a campaign.
Correct. I feel like it's a really good way to get a group together in a store to play weekly or monthly or whatever you decide to do. As far as a campaign, I feel, though, that with what we just talked about, most of the tokens not being valuable, there's really only a few planets that you need to go after for the entire thing. Ally tokens and resources secondary, and then your fighter bases. Those are the most important planets in the entire galaxy for that.
Well, it's similar to Corellian Conflict. You wanted to go for wherever the repair yards were.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because the repair yards just drastically increased how much you could repair, because you actually needed to repair those.
Right.
So I know it sounds like we're having a lot of negative, but we're just critiquing it because we actually really enjoy everything like this. And so for our next playthrough, I know I'm going to take the role of the Empire, and Ken is going to take the role of the Rebellion. We're planning on only using 2 fleets. This will just help us immensely with filming, honestly.
Yeah.
Because having to do 3 games that take it's just as much time as a normal game to edit and film.
Well,
takes up
that
huge amount of time.
And let's couple it with, there were times where we thought it was one fleet and we had to really sit down, and it took some time to adjust from fleet A to fleet B to fleet C. Each one flew a little differently, and then it became what was I flying against? And 3 is a lot to keep tabs on, and to think about upgrades, and to remember where you want to attack to get what type of upgrades. So I think this will do a little bit more on the overhead side for us. Plus, we were interested to see if it's better balanced with 2 fleets as opposed to 3.
Correct. So with that, we're also going to play with the crippled rule just to see how it plays out. That's just our house rule that we think will be beneficial for this campaign. We're going to think more about and possibly come up with different conditions for scarring and crippling to have a bit of a negative feedback. So then you want to try to keep your ships alive. Because right now, I felt like our playthrough, do I keep a squadron alive or do I just try to push it?
Right.
And the answer was always just push it because I would be able to heal it.
Right.
And then we're going to adjust how ally tokens work because ally tokens break the game. They just...
I would agree.
break the game.
And even if both sides had it, the same 2 fleets that are battling are likely going to be the groups that are using it. So it negates the effect. Although not always.
Interesting fact about our store campaign that we're doing. The only time I've ever lost is the other player had an ally token.
And you didn't, yeah.
Yeah. Yep. So
see, folks, John can lose Armada.
That and all my dice came out blank for like the entire game. It was.
I think that was one of the few games you were ready to flip a table.
Yes, it was bad. I felt bad about it afterwards. Like, I'm better than this. I shouldn't be raging. It was a stressful time. But yeah, no, really, seriously though, like everything missed. It would be like 3 attack, 0 hits. And I had his ship down to 1 health.
You couldn't get it, yeah.
1 health.
Huh.
Attacked it with a rogue fire spray, didn't get it. I attacked it with a Star Destroyer, didn't get it. Like, a victory. It's not a real Star Destroyer, just a victory. Attacked it with a Gladiator, didn't get it. Like, I could not do damage to get 1 health, and then I got tabled because of Han Solo at the beginning of the next turn.
Yep.
So I had first player always rolled all the damage that he could. He did like 3 damage to me with Han Solo at the beginning of the table. I braced it to 2 and died, and then couldn't kill his ship again with 1 health because I couldn't roll damage. So, it happens.
So that, I think, pretty much wraps up what we wanted to talk about with our first playthrough of Rebellion in the Rim. We'll definitely be doing another wrap-up, I think, after we've completed our second set. So speaking of completing our second set, so we're filming this in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. And as you can see, I'm at home, John's at home, so we're doing what we can for social distancing. We've got a couple ideas on how maybe to try and play this virtually that we're going to test out, and hopefully those work so that we can bring some of this to you. I know we've had one playthrough. John, you want to say anything on that, or?
So, there's a couple different ways to go. I know people are playing online with Vassal and Tabletop Simulator. I have no experience with that, and watching a game recorded on that I don't think would be necessarily that interesting. So we attempted to do like this Skype call, and it turned out very interesting. So basically we would measure where our ship wanted to, and it worked great for the start of the game. Mm-hmm. And then I would be like, okay, I'm going to move, and this is how I'm going to move. And then I would move my ships at my place, and Ken would move his ships at his place, and then I would be recording it at my place. And it seemed to be working until then, like, 3 turns in, like, my ship should be here, and then his ship at his place is here, and we're, like, 6 inches off, and we're like, how did this happen? So we're going through a process. We're probably going to use a grid map, so then we can be a little bit more accurate with how it is, which also just shows you how much different maneuver tools, depending on how loose they are, can play out. Because I know a lot of your maneuver tools are fresh, and I know some of mine are like the wiggliest things that you could possibly have.
Yeah, and then even just if you place the ship into the maneuver tool, the exact angle could be just slightly off, and 2-3 turns into it, you're going to be in a different spot. Fighters were definitely interesting as well in terms of how we maneuvered those. But you know,
we're like somewhere close.
Yeah, we're going to try it and see if it works, and you know, if they're film worthy, we'll post them. If they're not, well, we might throw them out there for some giggles.
Yeah. Some other things that we have ideas on doing is, I know that there have been questions in the past about basic planning strategies and things like that for different deployments and different objectives, first player versus second player. I might make a video or 2 on my thought process on that. It'll be very ranty, so if I do that, just bear with me. I'm going to be like blah, 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 about nothing. And then I know you had a couple ideas as well. Yeah, I think there might be 1 or 2. I've had a couple people asking about how I paint my squadrons, so I might actually do 1 or 2 videos on just showing some of the ideas that I have. Never hurts to see cheap, easy, quick ways to paint up some squadrons. And there might be a few other things that we can put together for our Armada series here on the channel. But bear with us, because we're now out of Armada content that's been pre-recorded. So it's going to be interesting over the next few weeks. Yeah, I know there are talks of it easing up in about 3 weeks for us. Right. So we will see if that happens. And if it does, depending on work schedules, John and I will definitely be getting together and probably get 1 or 2 quickly put together for you. Yep. Okay, so add a comment if you have any thoughts about the campaign, if you've played it and experienced certain things, or if you like an idea that we had, don't like an idea have an idea of yourself for the campaign. We'd be more than happy to talk about it. So you've been watching Ion Radio. I'm John. And I'm Ken. Stay safe. Stay safe out there.
put another cut in there. Unless you would like some Cheez-Its.
Thank you.